Most of us have probably been there. You're so excited for that new game that was announced a long time ago. It has all of these cool features that look so amazing. And you've been anxiously waiting for it for all of these months, or maybe even years. And it's finally coming out. You're actually so sure that it'll be good that you might have even paid for it beforehand. And then, it's finally here. You start the download, still naively happy. You start the game, and after you start playing, you play some more, and the disappointing realization sinks in. This is not what you thought it was going to be. It's not even close to what was promised. The cool features are not there, and the game is not even good. You feel like you've been scammed. You decide to investigate online, and everyone apart from the small minority religiously defending it, trying to desperately justify their purchase, feels the same way and is hell-bent on making the developer pay for deceiving them. This has become somewhat of a common occurrence in the past couple of years. A game developer makes unrealistic promises and the end result leaves everyone disappointed. With the prevalence of pre-orders in the current gaming landscape, it's kind of even incentivized in some ways. And us gamers keep enabling it by buying games before they release. But please don't misunderstand me though. I'm not blaming you if you do this. I do it all the time as well. Taking into account the convenience factor with preloading and pre-order sales, why would I shoot myself in the foot by having to wait more time to play the game and paying more for the same product if I'm sure beforehand that I like it? Just as an example, I was working on the day that Elden Ring came out, and there is no way that I'm going to spend my free time waiting for it to download and install after I get home from work. And if I can get it for cheaper, it's a no-brainer because I'm buying it regardless. On the opposite side of things though, imagine a developer whose only goal is to generate quick profits and who knows that their product is subpar. When there are so many nearly guaranteed sales on the table, why wouldn't you take them? I mean, it would only take a couple of white lies and half-truths to ensure that your profit targets get blown out of the water. In reality though, most of these cases are not so black and white. The people creating the game usually have some level of integrity, and in some cases you might even be sued for misleading your audience. Failing to deliver could result in some not so nice outcomes, like damaging the reputation and brand image of the company making the product and causing a decrease in brand loyalty for the customers. I also find it hard to believe that the passionate creators who are putting their blood, sweat and tears into trying to create these incredible worlds and immersive experiences would feel happy about releasing something half-assed and incomplete. What I'm trying to say here is, it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of moving parts, expectations from different directions, restrictions caused by different parties, and devastating results that can occur when things don't go to plan. And this is what this video is about. I'm going to explore what does it mean for a game or really any product or piece of media to be overhyped and then to flop. How does it happen? What does it feel like, and what are the consequences when the internet decides that they've been wronged in this way? A piece of media flopping is usually measured by comparing its actual financial success to its expected success. If, for example, a movie or an album doesn't hit the minimum sales number that it was estimated to hit, then it's a flop. In this video, however, I will extend the definition to include audience reception outside of sales into the consideration due to the landscape of sales in gaming. A lot of the games that flopped in the eyes of the audience actually did good numbers due to pre-orders and early sales in cases where review copies were not sent out. One example of these games is the infamous space exploration and survival game released in 2016, No Man's Sky by Hello Games. The game was first announced at VGX Awards in December 2013, and it immediately piqued people's interest. The game looked great, and in the following press run up until the game's release, Hello Games went on to promise some incredible and groundbreaking features. A procedurally generated, endlessly vast world with boundless possibilities. Anything you can imagine, you can do. And oh yeah, did I mention that the game is multiplayer? It's just so big that the chances of running into another player would be so unlikely that you probably won't ever see them. It totally has real multiplayer though. Just trust me on this, there's no way that I would lie to you, right? Hello Games, the developer, had released a couple of games before this, but never anything close to the scale of No Man's Sky. And during the beginning of the development, they only had 4 people working on it, an extremely small team for such a massive, innovative project. With Hello Games having no real prior works of this scale, the hype was purely generated off of the teaser material and the interviews. Hello Games even decided not to send out any review copies, and with fans having nothing else to base their expectations off of, they took everything said in the interviews as fact, only to be sorely disappointed when the game finally came out. I actually played the game on release, and it was just kind of empty and uninteresting. And also, surprise, the multiplayer thing was a total lie. Some people actually tried to meet up in the game, but there was no functionality for them to see each other or to interact in any way. The game wasn't like offensively bad or anything, it just didn't match the hype. And because of the high expectations, the fans were really mad. It even got to the point of sending death threats to the developer, which is always crazy to me. It did sell really well though, more than 800,000 copies in 2016, one of the top highest grossing revenue games in that year, and that's just the numbers on Steam. It's a bit hard to tell if the misleading marketing for this game was intentional or not. Hello Games was clearly not experienced in PR. The promises made in the interviews, while plainly proving not to be true, might have legitimately been things that were supposed to be added in the game, but as time went on proved to be too difficult to add to the initial launch version. The lack of transparency to what was actually happening behind the scenes did however enable them to ride the hype train all the way to launch. To the credit of Hello Games though, the current version of No Man's Sky is nothing like it was at launch. After the disastrous release of the game, the people at Hello Games stopped doing public statements and just got to work fixing the game. The fans compiled a list of all of the broken promises of the features that were initially supposed to be in there, and today most of them have been fulfilled with some massive extra updates on the side as well. I just revisited this game for this video, I haven't played it since launch, and it's honestly okay. I'm glad that they redeemed themselves by going above and beyond with the updates and additional content in the past 6 years, but the core gameplay loop is still just kind of the same. You mainly just land on a planet, mine some stuff, collect resources, use those resources to upgrade your stuff, manage your inventory and then do it again. Now, 6 years was a long time ago, so take this with a grain of salt, but if I recall correctly, that's pretty much the same stuff you did back then as well. Now the game is just prettier and there's additional content outside of the base game loop, like base building, terrain editing and a multiplayer social hub for example. Now, I know that the game has been widely considered good for the most part after the updates, so it might just be a me thing, but anyways, this is not supposed to be a game review, so let's just move on from this. The key part of what went wrong with No Man's Sky initially is the same thing with other games that disappoint as well. Over-promising and under-delivering. A little bit like misleading your customers to believe that they're buying the new iPhone and then selling them this thing instead, which is pretty much guaranteed to completely erase any trust the customer base might have initially had for you. What is interesting though is how Hello Games managed to turn the favor back to their side after release by doing the exact opposite of what they were doing before. They just stopped promising anything at all and just started delivering and fixing the game with new updates. In hindsight, it's kind of crazy how much hype No Man's Sky was able to generate by just off words and a few snippets. Like the only games that Hello Games had made in the past were these things. And I'd like to think that there's no way this wouldn't fly today anymore. Like, you'd think that people would only pre-order games from developers who have a proven track record with some great games under their belt. But unfortunately, sometimes not even that is enough though, which brings us to one of the most hyped games of all time. Cyberpunk 2077 is an action RPG set in a dark futuristic cyberpunk setting developed by CD Projekt Red, released after multiple delays in December 2020. The game had been in development for a long ass time, first announced in May 2012, with the first trailers for the game releasing in 2013, and because of the massive success that CD Projekt Red's earlier game Witcher 3 had, the expectations for Cyberpunk were through the roof. It was supposed to be the greatest game ever, and it even had Reddit's favorite wholesome Keanu Reeves in it. And as you already know, the release was a complete mess. The game was initially unplayable on consoles, which made Sony pull it from the PlayStation Store for half a year, and also caused CD Projekt Red to become subject to class action lawsuits due to them misleading their customers about the playability of the game, for which they finally settled out of for close to $2 million in December 2021. Personally, I only played it after the PS5 version released, so I don't have first-hand experience of how it was at launch. But the footage shows that it was just a buggy mess. Textures not loading, NPCs gliding around and T-posing all over the place, and overall performance issues with FPS drops on consoles in particular. And even after the PS5 release when I played it, most of the stuff was fixed, but it was still kind of just a somewhat generic mission-based open-world RPG with a cyberpunk skin added. The environment looks nice, but it's not really interactive or immersive, and the combat is what you'd expect from a game like this. It's okay, I guess. I did really like the first part of the game though, and I think that came down to the storytelling and atmosphere. I liked how genuinely dangerous Night City, the place where most of the game takes place, felt in the beginning. After you arrive in Night City, you are quickly introduced to the brutality of the police slaughtering people in the streets, and the nightmarish healthcare system of Night City, which immediately sets the tone for how disposable human life in this hyper-capitalist hellscape is, unless you're wealthy of course. The beginning also had the most human-like and interesting characters in my opinion, and I wish that us building our relationship with Jackie was not skipped entirely with the use of a cutscene. But after the first part ended and that thing happened, I just wasn't really into the game anymore. The missions were not as interesting, and it felt like the overall vibe of the game unfortunately shifted into something more generic. I'm not saying it's a terrible game though, I still managed to finish it. It's just not anything special in my opinion. Especially when Red Dead Redemption 2 was released 2 years before this, and it's on a whole nother planet in terms of open world immersion. I am happy though that the world of Cyberpunk 2077 had the opportunity to really come to fruition in the recently released Edge Runners anime by Studio Trigger, directed by one of the GOATs, Hiroyuki Imaishi. It focuses on entirely new characters and kind of patches up a lot of the things that were missing from the game, like the exploration of the main character's transformation into a criminal. It makes some bold stylistic choices, as Trigger shows usually do, and the end result is great. And in my opinion, it's the best way to actually experience the world. The anime is only 10 episodes long though, so if you crave more detail, you can only find that within the game. Cyberpunk 2077 had the same issue of overpromising as No Man's Sky did. There were supposed to be strong RPG elements, your choices were supposed to matter, and the NPCs were supposed to be living through actual daily routines to help with the immersion, but none of that actually ended up in the released game. What really differentiates the two games from each other is both the expectations based on previous releases and the scale of the project in general. Like, look at this. Hello Games, 4 people, no real past mainstream success, and then CD Projekt Red, 500 people working on the game for 8 years, and their previous game was massive and released to critical acclaim. I can only imagine the difference in mindset between those studios. When people know what you're capable of and the hype is growing, there is no room to fuck up. On the other hand, I feel like it's kind of freeing when you're working from a clean slate. No real expectations and people don't know you. It's easier to give it your all when the end outcomes are not going to be benchmarked against your earlier successes. It's easier when you're the underdog. I actually found a study regarding this when doing research for this video. The study takes a look at people in different scenarios, comparing performance in situations where either high or low expectations were placed on them. First, the study looked at employees in a workplace setting, where their supervisors gave them evaluations and future projections, based on their performance and later measured their performance after the evaluation. The experiment was also later conducted in a more controlled environment where the test subjects did a computer task involving clicking rapidly moving circles on the screen. In the later test, the test subjects were made to do a practice run, after which they were given feedback indicating either low, neutral, or high expectations. In both experiments, the underdogs outperformed the others. In the first test, underdog expectations were said to be a significant predictor of high performance, and in the second test, those who were met with low expectations performed above and beyond those who received high or neutral expectations. The study also comes to the conclusion that the performance boost only appears when the evaluator is seen as not credible in the eyes of the performer. I think this tracks when it comes to game development and media creation as well. I doubt the creatives making these games and media consider the end consumer as a credible evaluator for the quality of their product, making this effect come into play in these fields as well, in my opinion. This study mainly focuses on the point of view of the person who is given low expectations, and while I could make the assumption that if the results of the study are accurate, high expectations can result in lower performance in comparison, I also found this separate study which focuses more on the potential negative effects of high expectations. First, this second study looks at professional men's tennis matches. According to statistical analysis in the study, if the player that is favored to win makes a mistake or performs poorly in the beginning of the match, the likelihood of them quitting the match and claiming injury was higher than the underdogs. The second study also conducted a test involving students, where the test subjects were asked to compete in a trivia challenge for money with the option to change the trivia subject mid-test in exchange for a smaller prize. The catch is that one of the groups performing the test was told beforehand that the trivia questions were easy to increase the amount of external expectations placed on them, and the group with the so-called easy questions were more likely to change the trivia subject in order to avoid the risk of not meeting the higher expectations. I imagine that this type of pressure exists outside of tennis and trivia competitions as well, and in game development, when promises have been made and hype has been created, there is no option to just stop making it a game when things are going wrong, which would undoubtedly impact the end product. In the case of music, I've heard the argument that the reason some artists' first album is often considered their greatest is because they've had their whole life to write the first album, but only a few years to write the other ones. And while I think that this is a valid point, I feel that the curse of hype and expectations has an effect on this as well. Now, I'm not saying that you can predict the success of a game just on the basis of these things. Of course, we are all individuals, and game studios consist of many of them, and this is just a small element in the mix of all the other predictors of success. It's clear that it exists though. And I mean, I actually felt this in a very real way in the past month. And just to start this portion of the video off right, I want to thank you, the people who have been watching my videos. The amount of positive feedback and constructive comments I've received from you guys has been incredible. You've made me feel really nice, and I'm grateful that you've decided to click on my video out of all of the videos that were suggested to you, and for those subscribed to my channel, I'm grateful that out of all of the channels that are on this website, my channel is one that you're subscribed to. I started this account around 3 months ago, and I thought that I might hopefully reach a couple of hundred subs in my first year, but I got extremely lucky. The algorithm decided to bless me, and my second video ever kind of blew up. It took me around 2 months to get like 200 subs, and 3 days after that I hit 1000, and a week after that I hit 5000. At first I was so hyped for how fast this happened, and I still am, but then I also started feeling the pressure like, oh shit, my next video better be good, because I have all of these new people watching my content now. Please don't worry about me though, I'm still planning on making my content normally without letting it affect me. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who has had these types of feelings, whether it be from school or work or something else, and by having felt this in the past myself, I can't help but to sympathize with the people who find themselves in these positions. I really feel for the artists who were getting their hands dirty for years creating these worlds and stories, only for the games to come out broken and unfinished. As someone who has worked on some creative stuff in the past, I could never imagine that the artists, writers and developers would want to release their hard work in this unfinished state, which is why I feel that placing the blame on them would be kind of narrow-minded. Of course, we don't really know what it is that is happening inside those studios that causes them to overpromise and then release unfinished games. The reasons could be anything among unrealistic and inflexible development roadmaps and financial targets, issues in sharing responsibility over the quality of the product, intentional lack of transparency to mislead the customer base, or just something entirely different. Nevertheless, the outcome is unfortunate for all parties involved, except for when the developer makes out like a bandit because of undeserved hype. I didn't really end up involving examples of games where the hype levels were appropriately matched in this video, because it usually doesn't take that much to do that. As long as you don't lie about the contents of your game, you should be good for the most part. It's easier to avoid setting ridiculous expectations for yourself by just being truthful in the marketing. And if things go wrong mid-development and you can't really deliver on your promises, you have to make sure that people know what they're actually paying for. Avoiding these types of issues altogether is fairly simple if you just only give the customers the bare minimum in terms of detail about the game. One of my favorite examples of this is Elden Ring. We only had this one cinematic trailer for years, and we only knew two things about the game for a long time. It's open world, and the lore is written by George R.R. Martin. And the hype for that game was still insanely high, and I think that is just because of the trust that people have in From Software. The lack of information made the fanbase speculate and invent their own imaginary lore and bosses that maybe could be in the game, which was honestly really fun to follow from the sidelines as someone who was hyped for the game. Only after the development was nearing completion did we start receiving more information about it, and ultimately the game ended up exceeding most people's expectations in the end. Before making this video and actually spending some time thinking about this, I never really looked at game developers from this point of view. And I feel like after diving into this subject, I now have a more empathetic view of them in situations like this. But I also feel like it's important to recognize that most of these companies don't have your interest at heart, and if you're going to pre-order something, you might get just scammed even if it's by a trusted developer. But yeah, that's the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please leave a like, and if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to my channel. If you feel like you have a different take on this, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And thank you again so much for watching.